Last week, Steve Cummins and I talked about where the owned channel argument breaks down, how a marketing team of one actually uses AI day to day, and why you might have to start on rented land, but also need to be deliberate about what you build while you're there. This week, Steve and I get into something I've been thinking about for a long time, and something that Steve calls the validator problem. Here it is in the simplest terms I can put it in. If AI is doing more and more of the actual work, the writing, the research, the analysis, what happens to the people who are supposed to evaluate whether the work is any good? How do they build their skills? This is not just about theory. This is playing out right now in every marketing team hiring a junior marketer and handing them an AI tool on day one. Steve has strong views on what that means for the people coming up in their careers, for their leaders, and for what curiosity actually means as a hiring attribute this year and down the road. This is part 2 of my interview with Steve Cummins. I'm Tim Peter. This is the Digital Reset Podcast. Let's dive in. Probably the most misunderstood part of my book, and there's probably something in this to the way I put it together, but is I talk about big tech gatekeepers and how gatekeepers going to gate and things like that. And I think people hear that means you shouldn't, for some reason, you shouldn't work with Google, or you shouldn't work with Meta, or you shouldn't work with LinkedIn, or whatever the case is. And the subtitle of the book says beyond big tech, right? It doesn't mean instead of big tech, right? Of course you're going to show up on Google. Of course you're going to show up on the social media channels that are appropriate to your audience and your business and the like. That is a given. It is what do you do in addition to that allows you to grow a customer base over the longer term, right? So it's
the table stakes, right?
It's table stakes, 100%. Yeah, it'd be great if you could exist without them, but obviously they're going to be a big part of business for everybody, right?
Yeah,
so that makes perfect sense.
It's the first thing you got to establish. The other frustration I have when I first talk to founders, nearly every time, I say, "What have you done for marketing?" They say, "Well, we did some Google ads, but it didn't really work out," right?
Right.
And I think because Google ads is, once you've got a website and all that, Google ads is the next easiest and the next obvious thing to do. But as with all these things, there's a skill to it. You have to invest a decent amount of money to make it worthwhile. You have to have focus and all that. But it's sort of like a bingo card when I'm talking to a founder for the first time. It's like, at what point is he going to bring up Google ads?
100%. Yeah. I want to go back to your point about wearing different hats, and especially earlier in your career, because I want to dive into this in just a second. I love to tell the story about when I started my career. I actually worked for Charles Schwab during the dot-com boom. That's a story I've told people for years. But one of the things I loved about the job was because it was the dot-com boom, and because I was early in my career, much like you were talking about the advice you give about AI this month versus 2 months ago versus, 2 months from now might change. The early days of the internet, the early days of the web, the early days of digital was a very similar thing. And what I loved about my experience at Schwab more than anything else was every 3 months there was a new opportunity to learn and grow, right? There was an opportunity to do something different. Yeah. And it helped me a lot in my career. It has helped me a lot in my career. That in those early days, something new would come up, and it's like, we're going to talk about search, and I'd go, oh, I want to do that, and then they were like, we're going to talk about email marketing, and I was like, oh, I want to do that. Oh, we're going to talk about, and I'm like, I want to do, just raising your hand, and I was probably the second or third worst at everything in the right, because there were people who were really good at one specific thing. Yeah. But because I was, the second or third or fourth person at all of those things, I could backfill anybody. It made me very employable over the course of my career, because I can go, oh, wait a second, I actually know something about this. Oh, I know something about this. Obviously, you tend to get more specialized at a middle part of your career. But for sure, it was definitely something that worked to my advantage, I think.
Yeah.
So to this point of people early in their career, and I know this is something that is very, very near and dear to your heart at the moment. You wrote that the validator problem keeps you up at night, right? How do people build expertise early in their career specifically if AI is doing all the work? I think about this one all the time. But if you're a one-person team is using AI to cover channels that they don't fully understand, are they building capabilities? Are they building for their long-term growth? Or are they building a house of cards?
Yeah, so it's been rattling around in my head for a while. I was in a session. They were talking about this study that had been put together by Foundation Capital, and there was a lot about the future workforce, but they identified 4 roles that they thought were going to be needed, right? So the first is the C-suite, or Chief Accountability Officer, right, to direction and talk to the investors and all that. Yep. The architects, so how to build out these processes and build out these AI agents. Relationship people, so salespeople effectively, and then validators. So the idea that you're running all these agents, you get output from them, and then these validators are the ones that take that, iterate with it, check it, validate it.
Sort of the QA people.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's probably not the right term, but functionally, they're the quality assurance.
I think it's a good way to understand it.
Yeah,
so I have a lot of concerns with that, but one of my big concerns is how do you get to be a good validator if you've never done the work yourself, right?
Right.
And it's worried me for years because I work with a lot of graphic designers, art directors.
Oh, sure.
Some very good ones, but they only get to be good by doing the grunt work and the junior work and working their way up. So if we're now taking out that level of experience, how do you ever get to be good? And then my fear with that is, well, then you just tend towards mediocrity because all of the validators is going to be okay at their job, so they're going to validate okay stuff. So that was the theory behind it. So I think there's a few things that you can do. One is when you're using these AI tools to be very critical about them, right? So don't just set it up to do something and then let it do its thing in a black box and then deliver it to you. While you're doing it, interrogate the AI, right? Certainly, I'll go back to your potential sponsor, Anthropic. You have to expand it in most cases, but it will tell you the process that it's going through to do something, right? So you can look at that and learn from it. You can run your own experiments. Before AI, if you can remember such a time, I always used to be a fan of, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to start anyway.
Yep.
And I won't be great at it. I guess this is your third and fourth best argument, right?
Yeah.
But I'm going to learn as I do it. And it would then lead me to one of two things. Ideally, if I'm in a growth company, once I've done the basics and set up, let's say it's search, I can then hire somebody in to actually take it over and do it better. But I've learned more about it. I know who I need to hire. And I've kind of set it up and kind of modeled the behavior for that person to come in.
Yep.
The other way that it helped me, I would come and hire somebody like you, Tim, which I have done in the past, to come and help me with SEO.
And thank you for that.
But I know enough to be able to talk to you knowledgeably about it, make sure that I'm bringing in the right person, and then have a good conversation about it, right? So how do we get people to that level? And it's curiosity. I hate to say this because it's an undefinable thing, and I don't know how you train people to do it.
Yeah.
But you got to be curious. You can't put something into a black box, take out the answer, go, okay, move on. I think when I've managed people or mentored people, you get people to that point just by asking a lot of questions, right? Like, why did you do that? How did you do that? Did you think about doing this? And you build that up. So I think a lot of it's going to be driven by, for as long as they exist, middle managers to make sure that it's not just the machine has given me this answer, but, well, why did you set it up that way? What considerations, what context did you give it? And for certain things, I think you're going to be looking for people that have an interest in their own lives, right? So if somebody, an artist in their spare time, well, they're probably going to be a good validator for graphic design. But I think the medals are going to go to those who are curious and those who are willing to play around and dig into the details.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that's right. I picked this up a long time ago. This probably was Schwab, actually, where they always talked about you hire for attitude and you train for skill, right? You look for people who have the right kinds of attitudes of, I want to learn, I want to grow, I want to find out new things. And that has served, obviously, me well in my career, but also me well in finding people who were like-minded, not in the sense of a homogeneity of thought, but in the sense of having people who also shared certain values and certain kinds of approaches to things. I think that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. It drives me nuts. I've worked for a number of companies that only want to hire people from within the industry, basically from one of their competitors, particularly in sales. It happens an awful lot in sales. And I've always been on the mindset, find me a good salesperson and I can teach them the ins and outs of the industry any day over someone who's been selling the same stuff, for a different company for the last 10 years. But it's a mindset. I think a lot of people who have only been in one industry just assume that there is some unique magic about it.
Of course.
And I think actually the opposite is different. Bringing in outside views is a lot healthier for sure.
When I first moved into the hotel industry, having come from first working in recording studios, as we were talking about before we hit record, and then working for Charles Schwab. When I first moved into the hotel industry, I actually encountered a fair bit of that, both from people in the company who were like, well, you couldn't know this. You don't know anything about the hotel industry. And also when I wanted to hire people, to bring in who I knew had specific skills in the early days of digital and things like that, where with nothing but love and respect for many of the people I worked with, the hotel industry as a whole in hospitality, were terrible at internet. I mean, they just were really, genuinely, there's a reason why the Expedias of the world and the Booking.coms of the world and people like that got so big, was because that's what they actually focused on. Whereas hotel industry, that wasn't what they did, right? They just weren't tech savvy as companies, right? The other thing I would encourage people to do all the time, and it sounds like you do the same thing, is look to frameworks that encourage critical thinking. I'm a big fan of the 5 whys, right? Why, this thing happened. Why did it happen? Okay, well, why did that happen? Well, why did that happen, right? And you just keep going deeper till you find a lever you can pull until you really understand it.
Yeah, I think that's that. And those frameworks are valid, whatever you're working on. So getting into that mindset. The other thing I'll talk about a lot is books, right? Which I know is not a exciting area for a lot of people. I used to, in my interviews, when I was interviewing people, I used to always ask them, tell me about a good book that you've read recently.
Yeah.
And I gave up because the number of people I'd get the deer in the headlights and then they'd start telling me about maybe a blog that they'd read or something. But I actually think books are having a little bit of a resurgence.
Oh, for sure.
I think more people are reading them now. The trick with that is a lot of these books can get outdated pretty quickly. So
of course.
To your point, look for the ones that are more about a framework than a process.
Right.
A book that you and I think, both like is by Ethan Mollick, and he wrote it on AI, I think 3 years ago now. It's still valid because he didn't write about AI as it was at that moment. He wrote about the concepts behind it and how we should be thinking about it. I think there's something in there about treating it like an alien. Still valid, right? So searching for those kind of jobs that are about the frameworks and the mindsets, I think that's another smart way to kind of keep up with things. Yeah,
I apologize for the aside. I don't want to take what little time we have left for this, but just real quick, the mistake I made with the first draft of the book was it was much more about how as opposed to how to think, right? Because literally I would write a chapter and an hour later some news story would break and I'd be like, well, there goes that chapter in the trash, right? Like it took me a long time to figure out, I get how you actually write a book that actually has some potential staying power.
I'm told the second book is much easier, Tim, so you'll be fine.
I'm so sorry. I had a minor stroke there. I'll be fine though. All right. I think we've kind of covered this a little bit. But, we've both watched, either well-funded companies or frankly, companies that wish they were better funded, try to spread their bets across every channel and call it a strategy. Yeah. What is the conversation that actually changes a founder or a CEO or, the head of marketing, whomever it is? What changes their mind about focus, right? What drives the moment that matters in the room?
Yeah, I think a lot of it depends on the personality of that founder, CEO, VP, whatever it may be. So a lot of, again, I work a lot in the tech industry, so a lot of the founders are product people, right? They are engineers, developers, or what have you. So in those cases, the conversation is, well, think about a product. Do you develop every feature you want in parallel at the same time? Or do you build a roadmap and you prioritize based on urgency, customer request, whatever it may be. So that might resonate with them. It's like, oh yeah, you're right. We shouldn't be trying to do TikTok and Twitter and LinkedIn ads and events and podcasts. So that can hit sometimes. If it's someone with more of a sales background, how did you get your first 5 customers? Was it by going and talking to everybody you'd ever met? No, it was by identifying the specific group of people that are likely to get and then target in on that. So I think you have to appeal to whatever their background is. Now, if it's a VP of marketing, CMO, whatever, it's a little tougher. I think then you have to understand why they feel as though they need to do everything. And it could be because of pressure from the top. It could be because they have not stopped and thought about what are they truly trying to achieve and who are their customers, right? So, as marketers, we always talk about the ICP, right? The ideal customer profile. I tend to be dismissive of a lot of marketing theory because in startups, you got to move quick and you can't spend a whole bunch of time doing strategy. But the ICP makes a lot of sense because it saves you an awful lot of time, both in targeting, who you're speaking to, where you're spending your money. So I would always start out with that. And it may be that if it's a head of marketing who's all over the place, they either haven't done that, or in a lot of cases, I find they haven't been allowed to do that. And sometimes coming in as a consultant from the outside, you are enabled to do that.
Right. You can say the thing nobody else can say.
Do this. Right. So tactical versus strategic. And I like doing both. And I think, that it's one of the changes I've seen over the last few years. I think a lot of small companies used to just be so focused on the tactics, and they are now realizing you do have to have, albeit a thin layer of strategy or planning at the top, because marketing is so diverse now, right? I mean, I worked for my last corporate job. I worked for a CEO, and he came from sales and marketing, but he hadn't done it in years, and he was always say, Steve, I'm so glad I don't do marketing now. Like all the stuff you're doing didn't even exist 10 years ago, right? Which is why I love marketing. But that's why it's becoming a problem now, because there are so many things you can spend your time on.
Oh, of course.
So I think the conversation depends on who is driving that broad-based thing. But the other thing is, if it's somebody that's got funny, you just talk about money. Like, where do you want to spend those resources? If you're going to give me X amount of money, and you want to have impact, you got to tell me which of these 3 things we go spend it on. So I always bring it back to the 3 things. Let me do 3 things really well, and then we'll worry about the other 20 things on your list.
Well, what I love about that story, Steve, it demonstrates why you are a great marketer. It demonstrates why I wanted you on the show, honestly, is that you're modeling the very behavior you talk about as a marketer. You're meeting the person you're talking to where they are. You're speaking in their language. You're framing the problem in a way that, resonates in their own language, right? Which is what we're supposed to do as marketers and sometimes accomplish.
Well, and I think it helps. I started out as an engineer, right? I did not start out as a marketer. I worked for a GM once, and he would constantly point out that he was the only one in the room that had a marketing degree.
Right. Oh, yeah.
I have an engineering degree, right? But it does give you a different perspective, right? I mean, it helps me working with tech companies because I can grasp the technology fairly quickly, but I think it does also help that I haven't always thought like a marketer, right? So it does make it a little bit easier to sort of put yourself in different frames.
Steve, one of the things I genuinely enjoy about our conversations is we could talk for forever, frankly.
I agree, and every time we talk, it's like, why don't we do this more often? But,
100%. So to that point, what haven't we talked about? What haven't I asked you that you wished I had?
Well, I thought we might talk about AEO or GEO or whatever they call that now. Having said that, I'm not sure I want to talk about it. It is this minefield, and you are way more knowledgeable on it than I am. So I'm not going to ask you to talk about that. I think
perfect.
The one thing that I am seeing, which maybe others aren't, is that there is a shift in expectations for marketing, and I think part of it is because of AI. I think part of it is just as a general higher level awareness of what marketing is and what marketing can do. But what it's meant for me is most of my career was running corporate teams. I ran marketing at a division of Panasonic for a while. I've done it with smaller startup companies. But what I realized is a lot of companies need marketing and marketing strategy much earlier than they can typically afford to do it, right?
Yeah.
So typically companies would get into that, well, at some point I'm going to be able to hire a director of marketing, VP of marketing, whatever, right? But oftentimes it was too late. Like, you need to start building that awareness much sooner than they were able to do.
Yep.
So this newish model of fractional marketing, a lot of people call it fractional CMO. I don't like that phrase for a couple of reasons. But this idea of being able to hire somebody on a part-time basis. So typically when I work with companies, it's a day a week. So what it means is I'm not there as a consultant, writing a report and throwing it over the fence and moving on, right?
Yeah.
I'm embedded with the company. I'm, driven by their success. I know what's going on. I know the people. And I can bring in that higher level of thinking than typically a startup, a seed series, even Series A startup typically isn't able to do. But I'm also not really a strategist, right? I think of myself as I can do the strategy, I can put together a plan, but I also am somebody that wants to execute on it, right?
Yeah,
so,
right.
So that model, I think, is really helpful for growth companies. The way I often phrase it is, it's for companies that know they need to do more with marketing, but they don't really know where to start, right? And if you hire a junior marketer, they are going to tell you to do whatever the thing is that they know how to do, right?
Right.
TikTok,
right. When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Right.
Right.
Yeah, sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
So I think it's an interesting shift. It's somewhat self-serving because it's what I've chosen to do. But one of the reasons I chose to do it is, I mentioned before, I have a low boredom threshold. I like to be involved in a lot of different things.
Yeah.
But I do think I've always got excited at this early stage of growth.
Yeah.
And I think it's great to be able to help companies at that level of growth, hopefully sort of get off the launch pad quicker. Just quickly on my thing about fractional CMO, I don't like it for a couple of reasons. One is most companies, at least smaller growth companies, they do not need a CMO. A CMO is all about strategy, dealing with the board, dealing with investors, whatever it may be. What they need is director, VP or whatever, somebody who can do the planning and roll their sleeves up. The other thing that drives me absolutely crazy, Tim, and this is LinkedIn again, the number of people I see on there that say they're a fractional CMO. And oftentimes it's one of two things. One, they've never been a CMO, never even been a VP of marketing, right? But they did a bit of marketing. And the other thing that drives me nuts is they're actually not a fractional CMO. They're somebody who is looking for a job and wants to do some consulting in between times. I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
But part of the value of a fractional CMO is you can be there through the growth curve of somebody. And if you're looking for a job as well, you're not going to be able to do that. As soon as you find a job, you're going to move on. Again, if you want to do consulting, have at it. But I truly believe the fractional marketing approach is about becoming part of the team and being a part of their growth process and not just dropping in saying, oh, here's your ICP, here's a couple of things you should be doing, and and then moving on.
100%.
End of rant.
No, I love the rant. I agree with the rant 100%. I think my favorite clients are the clients that have been long-term engagements. My oldest client, one of the reasons, not one of the reasons, but a reason that I talk about hotels so often, is my oldest client is a group of hotels. They've been a client literally since a week before I opened the door. That's 15 years now, right? That's cool. And it's exactly that. I think that makes perfect sense. And it's funny you tell the story about people who are just doing this while they're waiting for a job. I literally had somebody ask me in the earliest stages of starting consulting is, well, the reason we're not sure we want to hire you is you're just doing this to get a real job, right? Yeah. And I was like, no, I actually did this on purpose. This is what I wanted to do. But it took a little bit of time to convince people that was actually intentional and not just, doing this until a better gig comes along. I'm like, no, this is the better gig. This is the whole point. But,
and it's tough. I mean, I've been doing this 3-4 years now, and I still get the question from people. It's like, but if they offered you a full-time job, you take it, right? It's like, no, this is what I want to do. This is what I enjoy doing. And there's risks. There's risks with everything,
of course,
right?
Of course.
But no, this is what I chose to do. And the other side I'll say is it's a tough job market out there. So in no way am I saying people shouldn't be doing it. It's the terminology and the approach is all I'm talking about.
No, that makes perfect sense. So I've got 3, these are quick questions. These will wrap up here. But, first, just based on what you talked about, Steve, I think you know I'm a big fan of your work. I'm a big fan of what you do. I'm a big fan of the way you think about this, and I know you're of great help and service to the clients you work with and the like. So I want to help you actually find more people who are looking for that. Where can people learn more about you and all the great work you do?
Well, that's very kind of you, Tim. Despite what I've said about LinkedIn is still the best place to find me. And I was one of those early adopters. My LinkedIn handle is actually just my name. It's not Steve Cummins 3X. That's just Steve Cummins. The other thing I would say is you said some nice things about my newsletter. It goes out every 2 weeks, talking primarily about B2B marketing. There's been a lot of AI stuff in there recently, but I typically sort of tell a story about something that I've been dealing with, and then I also include what I've been reading this week, so I put a link out to something that I think is interesting for people. So it's a Substack newsletter, so if you just go to Substack, search either for my name or The Marketing Mix, which is the name of the newsletter. If you subscribe for that, I would be thrilled, and you'll get a letter from me every 2 weeks.
Perfect. And I love that it's called, first of all, there will be links to all of those in the show notes, both on the website and on YouTube. But I love that it's called The Marketing Mix, because you're a bit of a mixologist. You're somebody who really enjoys cocktails. So what's your go-to recommendation for folks to enjoy during the summer for a cocktail?
I do. So I should have said, so the last thing on every one of my newsletter is a cocktail that I've either enjoyed or I'm recommending. And there's a marketing tip for you. The reason I put it in there is to give people an excuse to open the newsletter every week. And the number of people I run into that say, I saw your cocktail this week. I don't know if they've read the rest of it, but they always skip down to the bottom. Summer cocktail.
Like putting milk in the back of the grocery store, right?
Exactly, right? It works. It's marketing 101. Marketing works.
Love it.
People. It works.
Love it.
So summer cocktail, this was popular, I think, 2 years ago, maybe last year.
Yeah.
Something called the Hugo Spritz, because it's very refreshing. It's low alcohol. So it's basically, it's Prosecco, it's elderflower liqueur, the Saint-Germain stuff you see in these funky little bubbles.
Yeah.
A little bit of soda water, some mint if you got it. Really nice and refreshing. My other go-to cocktail. I have a lot of go-to cocktails. Since I suspect a lot of people who listen to this may be road warriors as well. So my travel cocktail, which is also refreshing, nobody can screw this up, and you can get it on pretty much any airline, is Scotch and ginger ale.
Oh, sure.
Because,
of course,
you can't screw it up. It's pretty light, and that's my go-to. When I get on a plane, that's my mental thing of relaxing. If I get one of those, then I'm good. But
I do a bourbon and ginger, but it's
there you go.
You're never going to go wrong.
It works, right? It works.
Absolutely. Well, Steve, this has been just, first of all, it's always a delight getting to catch up with you. It's always a joy to chat. I'm glad we're able to share it with folks this time around. But we've talked about a lot of things today. If there was just one takeaway from today's discussion that you'd like the audience to hear, what would that be?
Yeah, I would say most of the stuff that you are reading about marketing and what you should be doing is intended for companies that have teams of 5 or 10 marketing people.
Oh, sure.
Right? And there are so many marketers out there that are a team of one, and they're going to feel as though, I got to be doing all of this, right? So the first thing to remember is a lot of these people have colleagues either side of them that are taking care of the blocking and tackling, which is what you're also having to do. And then allied with that is this whole idea of just pick 3 things. Just pick 3 things and do them well. It's not to say you don't do any of the other stuff, but block out your calendar. Make sure every week you're doing something on those 3 things and building momentum and moving it forward. Marketing does not have to be as complicated as people think it is. You can make it very complicated, but the basics, like putting a cocktail recipe at the end of my newsletter, the basics still work. The technology around it's gotten more complicated, but, just keep it simple. At least start simple.
Love it. What a great place to wrap up. Steve Cummins, it is, again, a joy to get to spend some time with you. Thank you so much for your time and for a great conversation, and we'll chat soon.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Tim.
If you want even more from Steve, and you should, you can find him in the same 2 places as last week. The Marketing Mix newsletter goes out every 2 weeks on Substack. Search Steve Cummins or The Marketing Mix, or you'll find the link in the show notes. And yes, there's a cocktail recommendation at the end of every issue, which, based on the conversation Steve and I had today, I can confirm is really well informed. If you want to work with Steve directly, you can find him on LinkedIn or at Solent Strategies. All the links, as always, are in the show notes. This interview wraps up what I think has been a really solid stretch of episodes for the show. We started with the gatekeeper problem in episode 498. We worked through the roadmap in episodes 499 and 500, took a look at the historical view in episode 501, and validated it with Daniel Stanica's research in episode 502. Now Steve has given us the practitioner's view of what it all means for the people actually running marketing teams right now. Fun stuff for me, hopefully super useful for you. I'll be back next week with another episode. In the meantime, if you know a marketing leader who's wrestling with what AI means for their team, send them this conversation. Both parts of it. They'll thank you for it. You can find the show notes for today's episode at timpeter.com/podcasts. And if you're ready to go deeper on building a brand that customers will ask for by name, my book, Digital Reset, Driving Marketing and Customer Acquisition Beyond Big Tech, is the roadmap you need. You'll find it on Amazon.com and bookshop.org, and the links, of course, in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening today and every week. I genuinely appreciate all of your support, and I would not do this show without you. Until next time, please be well, be safe, and as always, be excellent to each other. I'll see you soon.